lawyers up the district commission or the district coordinator level. So that was very important, and we took that to heart and decided to change from de novo. Now, they don't want another judge. It's not going to change their processing times. According to all the judicial analyses about how many judges that you need and what kind of caseload, et cetera, it is not warranted. Now, the question that's been posed by many of the practicing lawyers as well as the judiciary is, has anyone identified a case in the last 2 years where applicants have requested a trial date that they were not promptly given? The position of the judiciary is they can provide a hearing in 30 days from the request, and they have not had any situations that have not been able to provide that. The clearance rates, we've talked about that. That's how many cases come in, how many cases go out. For ease of numbers, because I'm not a mathematician, if you get 100 cases in a year, you have disposed of 153 of them during 2024. We're at 171% so far, but that number will undoubtedly pick up as the end of the year approaches, percentage-wise. But the most important piece that I am thrilled to get at this point is that at any one time, the docket of the environmental court right now has only 55 cases pending. That was a piece that we did not understand because we knew about incoming and outgoing, but we didn't know what was actually pending in the salad bowl for you, Alex. And I thought that was important because to understand what kind of resources are needed, there are 2 judges, and understanding what the volume of the docket is critically important, and it is a piece of information we have just gotten. So that I think is very important. And then the other point that they made was on the record appeals, and we had heard this during the stakeholder process from a number of the attorneys who have dealt with on the record appeals from municipalities. Chris Roy in particular, who was highlighting the fact that because of AI and Zoom and YouTube, the ability to get records transcribed, which is what is required in court, it's come to a standstill. And so it's really delaying the on-the-record appeals, which you would think would go faster than a de novo review. That I thought was very interesting. Now, in terms of the memo that he provided, I want to show you the statistics. I know we've looked at a lot of them in the past, but I think this is really important because the other piece of information that they provided and analyzed for us is what is our caseload at our district commissions and for our coordinators versus how many cases are appealed. We know the number of how many cases each year was appealed, and it's varied a little bit, but not much. It goes from 11, an average of 11 to 15. That's about. There may have been one a little bit higher, one a little bit lower, but it is 1.4% of the cases that are actually processed by the lower level, JOs and district commission decisions. JOs is only 1.1%. If you look at right here, I guess I shouldn't have made all of this blue, but anyway, I mean all of this pink. So in terms of Act 250, here's how many permit applications were received, 352. Here's how many decisions were issued. That's just, I know it doesn't sound like it makes sense, but sometimes there's more than just the permitting decision. So of 363 decisions that were made by our district commissions, 2.4% of them were appealed. In the JO arena, it's even smaller. And so 267 JOs issued last year. However, if that doesn't include incomplete letters that were not appealed, which there are many, many. I mean, maybe even 1.5 to 2 times this number of decisions. So JOs are minuscule, 1.1% appealed. So a total of 1.4% of our cases. Now, the reason why I'm going to in detail to talk about this is because I want to stop sharing and we want to go to the
But before you
financials.
stop,
Oh,
well,
sure.
that's okay. I
Yeah.
just want to highlight something you just pointed out, and that
Yeah.
is that incomplete letters are technically JOs, and those were not being counted in your account there.
Yes.
So
Thank you for
267 doesn't include incomplete letters, which can also be appealed as JOs.
Yep. Thank you for specifying that. All right. So last year we had 9 cases. Okay. Now let's talk about the resources that we're going to need. I went back to the necessary updates for Act 250, the NRB study that led to the enactment of 181. And that study resulted in a split of opinion about whether to stay with the court or whether to go to the newly created board that was suggested. And I went through that information. There is a section that talks about the additional resources that might be needed depending on what size of a board. They were recommending a 3 to 7 member LURD. Well, they didn't call it that at that point. And there was a discussion about the Act 181 work as well as the appeals. There was a suggestion that 1 or 2 additional lawyers might be needed if appeals were taken, and it's a comprehensive package that also was taking into account the other recommendations of all of the studies and tier work, et cetera, that we have to do vis-a-vis 181. And so we have information from Rachel because I asked her, we sat down and tried to figure out what is it that we're going to need. And I'm going to put this on the screen. So we thought, all right, if we need an additional attorney and a technical person, clerk person to process documents, we're talking about, you know, 1 LURB legal services specialist. That, and this is like salary, benefits, the whole 9 yards of what it costs for an entire employee. So we have 110 for a tech person and clerk, 200 for a staff attorney, including benefits. And then we have an increase in a database and the fee for space meaning the technology space, and incidental costs. So we're looking at $395,000 annually to bring aboard a lawyer and a tech and build a database. Now, and that would be, we talked about, that would be for Act 250, and then the other scenario, which is really, really difficult to predict because we have no data about how many Tier 1A, all of Tier 1A, and Tier 1B housing. We have no idea how many cases that there are going to be. So we just had Rachel run the numbers for 2 lawyers, and is it still 1 tech? I can't remember. But anyway, here's the problem. These costs annually to add these kinds of personnel, in my opinion, are not warranted for taking 15 cases off of the environmental division's docket. It comes out to something like $26,000 per appeal. It is more conceivably than the applicant would be spending on their lawyer to go through the Act 250 process. Now, you can say, okay, but we're going to take Tier 1, Tier 1A and Tier 1B housing. We don't know how many that's going to be. And I have a huge concern because as I went back through the necessary updates report, it talks about 1, maybe 2 lawyers for the entire shebang. Yes, if you need an appellate lawyer, but look at this comprehensively. These are the resources that we're predicting you may need. But the problem that we have is we did get an Act 181 lawyer. We got a 3rd lawyer. And also, if we are taking on appeals, those 15 cases that we're going to be the tribunal to hear and decide, we will no longer have an attorney representing us as a party in the environmental division. So it's hard to exactly estimate how much time of our current, let's say we had 2 lawyers before the 181 lawyer was added to our staff. Of those 2 people, they handled everything that we were doing because we didn't have Act 181 yet. So one of those lawyers or some large percentage of one of those lawyers is combined. You're trying to figure out how much hours, how much personnel. But if we are in Act 250 litigation now as a party and we're handling 15 cases, becoming an appellate lawyer, you're not, that staff doesn't have to do the job anymore of showing up and litigating cases. And we have an extra lawyer that we've been given. And at some point, the Act 181 rulemaking and, all of those events will diminish perhaps to very little. So while we have identified what we think we may need, I don't necessarily, well, first of all, I think it's a non-starter. I think it is way too expensive to suggest, even if we took the tier zoning cases, this is not financially sound. And it is too high a price. Now, so ultimately it comes down to, do we really think that we cannot repurpose our legal staff? And the other question is, why do we need to build a new database if we're only handling 15 cases that, can't they be folded into the Act 250 database, buy a little bit more room? So I'm sorry to come in with this, at the 11th hour, but the problem is, now that we know what the costs are and now that we're looking back at, all right, what is our staff able to do? Now, having said all of this, we have a lot of housekeeping work to do that was deferred for decades. So we do have a lot of work to get through for Act 181 and for redoing our rules of procedure, our Act 250 rules. We have been doing guidance over the many years, last 10 years, but the problem is they haven't been turned into rules, and we're not supposed to do guidance in lieu of rules. And now we're a fully formed board. We have hopefully the resources and personnel to do that. So I believe that the best option is to say, we can do this, but not until 3 years from now. That it's only then that we will have more information about the tiers. We will understand what actually is being appealed. We will also know what's going on with regional plans, the tier mapping. I mean, there is also the potential for litigation to arise in that arena. When I say, no, tier 3 isn't on my whole property, Alex, it's, it's mapping that doesn't work. We might have to be dealing with those kinds of issues as well. Right now, it is completely speculative. But the best that I can come up with is at least to point to, and do I want to say we can make do with what we have? That's a challenge because in the unknown, I have no idea what's going to happen with the volume of appeals. However, I will step back one moment and say my recommendation about Act 250 appeals, as much as I think it would be very beneficial for this board to be handling those, from a policy perspective, I think that we can do the work, and Jenny and I have talked about this. You can effectively, implement policy through a robust rulemaking process. But here's the kicker, okay? Let's say, no, we need to be actually in that case. But the problem is there are so few of them. We have to figure out what are our resources utilized the best for. They are utilized for the majority of these cases, not for the small, teeny number of appeals. Because it is too big a system to build, at least at this stage, for such a small universe. And then another universe that's so unknown, we don't even know what to expect. a wait and see. We can say, look, this is the best board model that we could come up with. But whether or not we need additional resources to pull this off, we won't know that for a while.
Yeah, I think that is a sensible analysis. And I think that you will hear that, yeah, we gave you an Act 181 lawyer. We already gave you the extra staff. It could be that we may not need another lawyer in a few years if we were to take on Act 250 appeals. I still feel like we probably would need a legal services person, but because
I agree. I think we have a bigger need for that support than we necessarily do
Yeah.
for another lawyer.
Yeah. But I think that it is something that we don't yet know, or we certainly don't have the capacity right now because of all the balls that are in the air, because of the potential litigation that could come out of the balls that we currently have in the air when they get, batted out of the park. There may be some there may be some litigation, and our lawyers may need to focus on that. But perhaps around the time that we issue the report to the legislature, we may have a better idea of whether we have the capacity to take on these appeals. I feel like it would be good for the integrity of the program if we did have Act 250 appeals that came to the board. Particularly, it has never made sense to me that JOs go directly to the environmental court. But I think that our hands are full right now, and that we could probably make a better determination as to whether we can accommodate taking on appeals in a couple of years.
Let me give you one other piece of information from the necessary updates report. One of the recommendations was that reconsideration of JOs comes to the board, not back to the coordinator. That is something that we could consider. I think there are very few of them. I don't know if Jenny knows or Pete knows how many of those occur.
The reconsiderations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is one other very easy element that we could build in that I don't think would be, problematic or over our capacity.
Kirsten?
Yeah, just off the, so as
Pete.
Just in terms of the reconsideration, I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but I was an attorney for the board during the time frame that reconsiderations did go to the board. And I'll just say, my recollection is there was a handful of them a year. So maybe in the realm of 6 per year or something like that, during that time. But we can look back and find those numbers too.
Pete, why were they taken away from the board?
There's probably multiple reasons for that. I'm not sure it was developing, staff cohesion within the program was maybe part of it. But yeah, I'm not exactly entirely sure of why that change was made. But it was very short-lived, sort of experiment in terms of having that approach.
How about other board members' thoughts? Alex, you got any?
Well, believe previously the crux of our recommendation was going to be that we recommend that appeals of Act 250 permits and jurisdictional opinions come to us, and that they come to us on a time horizon that is reasonable so that we can we can have time to get ready and that sort of thing. Is that still what you're planning to write, Brooke? It sounds like it is, but maybe with a longer time horizon, or are you proposing to write a different basic recommendation?
So I want to be able to propose the best board model. This is, we've created this. This is the best option. But the problem that I have encountered is to then say, but it's going to cost $400,000 per year. And my own personal opinion is that in the end, it's a cost benefit analysis. We have to make a recommendation and we can say, here's a board model. Sure, do this. And it's going to cost, upfront cost plus 400 grand per year into the future. I don't think that's what they're looking for. I think the legislature is asking us to recommend what to do. And the answer is, here's a great board model. It's the best that we can create. But it's too expensive for such a small number of cases. Or,
yeah,
right. Or we say, here's a great board model and we can do it, but we just can't do it until 3 years from now or 4 or 5, whatever the time horizon is. But I think that we still have to be able to say, and we can do it within the resources that we have, because we already have been given the extra lawyer and we are freeing up time of our existing 2 lawyer staff who will no longer be litigating cases. So my personal opinion is we can do it, but we have to do it with the resources that we have, which will not be available to us until at least 3 years from now. So why don't we have another report or something at that point to say, okay, can we do it? What has happened with appeals? What's happened,
I guess what I'd be more comfortable with is a recommendation that says we've looked at various models. Here's the one we're recommending. It's a board model for these type of appeals. And we feel that the appropriate time horizon for making the shift, if the legislature wants to do that, is whatever length that is, 3 years, 2 years, whatever and then skinny down the cost estimate. Right? Because I think what you're basically saying is that the cost estimate that's just draft that Rachel helped you with is not accurate. And that in 2 to 3 years, it'll cost us far less because we won't need another attorney. We might need just one more technical staff. So couldn't we do that? Just revise the cost estimate, push it out, say that it really needs to be pushed out 2 to 3 years and call it a day. And then the legislature can decide whether they want to do that.
Yeah. So what I would ask Rachel to do, and that nothing's wrong. She did exactly what we asked of her, cost it out for 1 and 1, 2 and 2, depending on which model we were looking at. So I totally understand what you're saying. I think that it's when we have those people freed up, this model will work.
And I think
And
that's
I
a question
agree,
for
I
our
agree.
legal staff, not for Rachel, right? That's a question for Jenny and all of us to say, do we feel like our 3 attorneys, once we actually have 3 attorneys, will be freed up in 3 years, or is it 2 years, or is it a year and a half? What is that number? And that's Rachel crunches the money numbers, but I think it's really Jenny that needs to tell us and us, what that time horizon is.
Well, I think the time horizon is still up in the air, unless, and Sarah has said she's willing to sit down with me and try to really understand, not just these deadlines, but when are we going to be completing each task kind of thing. And I agree with you. Yes, if we could have Rachel go back and say, okay, if we need to add to our Active 50 database to use whatever existing stuff we have. And I mean, it's the lawyer piece that's the problem, because it's not just that we have been given a lawyer and we'll have, no lawyer doing the litigation any longer as a party, But we were seated expecting, we're a professional board, not a citizen board. And I think that a lion's share of this lift and all of the work is also on the board itself. I think it's important to have the lawyer element to make sure that we deliver sound legal decisions, especially on, legal motions that are filed and evidentiary objections at hearing. This is our job too. So we also have to think that when we are going to become available to be holding hearings and writing opinions.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think that's not next year and probably not, at the front end of 2027. But I think 2 years from now, I think in October of 2027, we could do it. I think we'll be done with the Act 181 stuff. We'll be through our first pass of a rules revision, an update, and that's just my sense. Brooke, you and I have talked about this offline, so you know what I think about that already.
Yeah, Rachel.
Rachel, yeah.
Couple things. Just for context, we added over 1.5 million for the board to come on to our organization. So I don't think that this cost estimate is out of the ballpark for the amount of work that may be that it may entail. But just to give you some basis, like a background basis to figure out how much will this cost. So more than 1.5 million for the board and its ongoing duties, 400,000 for taking on appeals is proportionate. I think, for the amount of work that it entails. I also would not shortchange yourself. Like, this is not the place to necessarily be shy or completely underestimate the amount of work that this may need. I think that, so I'll just leave it there, but I think this would not be the place to do that, in my opinion. That's all.
And
And
I
Rachel,
totally
Rachel, you mean that this, that looking at an additional lawyer and an additional staffer is minimally necessary if we're going to take this on?
I certainly think you need another administrative person. And I think that the other thing that I'll say is that I know that my experience, working with a leadership team as a part of this organization, change is constant. And every year we have gotten more studies to do. So don't just think of Act 181 as a one and done scenario. You are going to get additional studies most years that you are going to need to complete, as well as all of the other deferred maintenance that exists in this organization. And you need people time to be able to get through that work. So I don't think that this is, what you're talking about does not seem realistic to me operationally, but it's not my decision to make. That's all.
Thank you, Rachel. Kirsten?
I'm kind of in the, wait and see. I have been mindful of the fact that the legislature already did allocate the board an additional attorney. And although we've been operating mostly with just the 2 attorneys and hope to have that third, person on board soon, I think in a couple years' time, I sort of agree with Alex that we should be through a big chunk of the Act 181 responsibilities. I appreciate too what Rachel is saying. I think that there is going to be this probably, continuation of evaluating how things are working, maybe, conducting additional studies and reports. But I would like to think that we could take on the limited number of Act 250 decision appeals within, already identified resources. And I apologize too, Jenny, you called on me, but actually our hand has been put up for the benefit of Pete. So I feel like I should turn it over to you, Pete.
No worries. I'm happy to defer to the board.
Yeah.
I was just gonna simply, remind the board about the 2029 study, that's under Act 181, and part of that study does require you all to look at your staffing levels at that time as well, just in terms of, kind of the timeframe. 2029 is at least what the legislature was thinking you should be assessing that need.
Thank you, Sarah.
So a few things, and thank you, Rachel, for the background information. I think where I feel most comfortable presenting our findings to the legislature is here's what it take right now to make the change, and here's the scope that we'd recommend for changes, and here's the cost to it. And being a little bit more in terms of, we do anticipate that as we move away from approving regional plans and this influx right now that we're in, and we get a better handle on tier 1As, that we will have additional capacity to be able to accomplish this. So maybe decreasing the costs of switching to the board model. I think a few things on that front, which is the other sort of things to sort of take into account is I see our chart crisscrossing at some point, because I think as we move into from interim exemptions into more permanent exemptions with the tier 1s, I think also as the judiciary starts, I think you've done a lot of research in how they're streamlining their process. What we're going to have is a couple of years from now, probably even more expedited appeals process that we're sort of on that track to accomplish, possibly fewer Act 250 appeals. And so then if you take a look at a couple of years from now, even adding the admin, that sort of cost benefit ratio is more sort of problematic, because what we're trying to accomplish in terms of how many cases might actually be decreasing. So I think it's worthwhile sort of painting that whole picture, and it's not for us to decide. I think we've done what was required of us. We've done the research to look at the board model and what it would cost and how to get to it. But in terms of the when and how, I think we can offer some suggestions, but I don't think that's for us to decide. And I worry about projecting too far into the future with the uncertainties that we have at hand. I just, the further out that we go, the more uncertainty that I think that there is. And I think to Rachel's point too, in terms of cost, is as you project further out, the less certain you are about the cost, and it will always go up. So I appreciate so much, Brooke, all the work that you've put into this and the detail level that you have to present to us, because I appreciate this conversation with the board so very much. And I think that you've really knocked it out of the park to fully inform us. I just, unfortunately, I'm not sure that there is a good solution for the issue that you've presented us.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like the board is still on board with saying, here's the board model. We don't have the capacity currently, not just in terms of our Act 180, well, because we have so much going on right now, we do not have the capacity to do this right now. We think that once the Act 181 implementation work is primarily complete, that we could have the capacity. We don't know that yet. And we think that could be as soon as October 2027. It might not be. So I think that that the legislature does feel that, yeah, we have 5 full-time professional board members and a new lawyer. They're not going to be all that receptive to additional lawyering of this program. At this point. So I think the way that Alex put it after Brooke's presentation is the way that we are still headed. We're not saying we shouldn't take on appeals. We're saying, I think that we should take Act 250 appeals as a program. We just can't do that right now. But here is the model, and here is when we think we possibly could do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I so appreciate Rachel's points as well. But I'm also mindful of the status quo, which the judiciary is going to keep chugging along and they don't need any money. And particularly right at the moment, the economy is a tough one. So yeah, I do. 2 years, that feels a little bit short. I was thinking more in the 3 to 5 year range. Check in at 3 with them.
Or check in at 2.
Or check in with 2, and then we'll have better information at that point on what's happening with appeals.
Yeah. Sound good for now? Do you feel like you can write up a draft for us, Brooke?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
Okay. No, that's very helpful, everybody. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry to keep you late.
That's okay. You're not keeping us late. It's our duty to discuss all this. Is there any are there any comments from the broader audience here before we adjourn? Sarah?
I'm just going to, before we adjourn, if Brooke and Kirsten could let me know about the scheduling for the site visit for December 1st, if that works before you unplug for the day. Greatly appreciate it, because we do have so much coming at us. Trying to book anything right now is getting a little bit hairy. Thank you.
I'm great on October 1st. That works for me.
You mean
Thanks.
December 1st? Yeah.
I mean, not October 1st, December 1st.
Kirsten, were you good with that for potential site visits and meeting for Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission plan review?
And since we're talking about these regional plan reviews, I would like to also make known that we did receive the Northwest Regional Planning Commission pre-application, which includes Tier 1B, and that can be viewed on the Act 250 database under the board documents, and the number that's been assigned is RPC 08-0001. If if interested people just go to the Act 250 database and click on that board tab, they should find the 2 that are on there now. And I guess I would be comfortable also mentioning we have come up with a tentative date. This is not cast in stone. It's not warned. So it's subject to change, but the tentative date is November 13th. Let me just quickly double check my calendar.
Thursday? Kirsten, that's a Thursday.
That's right. It's a Thursday, and that would be a day when we would be in the northwestern part of the state for a site visit to various locations, followed by the public meeting about that pre-application from the Northwest RPC. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Sarah, you got your answer for Chittenden County, right?
Did I get one from Kirsten?
Yeah, I think she said
Yeah,
yes.
no, yeah.
Okay,
And
perfect.
then she added on
Yeah.
what's happening with Northwest.
Yeah, and I added that on probably prematurely. We're going to discuss that on Thursday as a board. So
Yeah.
apology.
That's okay. I think it's good to point out if people want to get a jump start, it's in the database.
Okay.
So, okay, anything else before adjournment from anybody? All right, let's,
I'll
I
move
would
to adjourn.
entertain a motion. Oh, thank you, Brooke, for motioning to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kirsten. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Hi.
And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you on Thursday.
Thanks.